Hey everyone, just wanted to announce that I am now working with a small local company named People's Choice Companies LLC to sell merchandise and products on Etsy. Consider supporting me and the small company by purchasing stuff on the Etsy store. Link is in the description. I am also helping out with a GoFundMe, also by People's Choice Companies, linked to helping create projects for struggling people. Consider donating to help out with that. Link it will be also in the description. Alright, thanks. Now back to the video. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword is an enigma among the Zelda franchise. Excluding these other enigmas, of course. What was once a franchise that had been thought to be this untouchable gold standard of excellence has finally met a game that did not see universal praise. Excluding Zelda 2, of course. Despite being the expected golden child darling among most critics, a good deal of other critics, and mainly gamers, were seemingly put off by the game's extreme use of motion controls and doubling down of linear game design. It was a bizarre experience to witness a Zelda game, at least a home console Zelda game, that was not seeing the universal praise that other home console Zelda games would typically get, to the point that the franchise would radically shift in the opposite direction, giving us the next-gen classic that was Breath of the Wild. Me, though, I personally loved Skyward Sword. Sure, I'll agree that the motion controls were awkward and the segmented world, linear progression, and empty sky was somewhat disappointing. But I would be lying if I said that I was not entranced and in awe by the game's incredible art style, incredible story, godly orchestral music, and dungeon design that has outclassed every other Zelda game in existence by far. It's not the best Zelda game, but it was definitely a damn good one that I enjoyed my time with. But, much like many other video games, Skyward Sword saw various changes throughout its development, some of which may have suggested a Zelda experience that would have been more agreeable with fans than what we got. So, today on Beta Quest, we will take a look at the development and beta of Skyward Sword. The development and beta? The beta and development of Skyward Sword. Yes. Development on Skyward Sword seemingly began sometime shortly after the completion of Phantom Hourglass on the DS, with the game being privately announced by Eiji Aonuma in E3 2007, then titled Zelda Wii. At this stage of development, it was already decided that the game would make use of a new control scheme and feature one-on-one sword combat, with attempts made to appeal to both hardcore and casual audiences. It was also felt that Twilight Princess, then the latest major Zelda game released, didn't fully realize the idea of a vast and realistic world, and they not only wanted to do this, but they also wanted to make a grand and memorable experience, equivalent to that of Ocarina of Time, as well as one that would feel familiar yet fresh to experienced and newcomer players. However, around the same time, Spirit Tracks was also in development, and it was ultimately decided that focus would be put on Spirit Tracks over Skyward Sword, due to the latter game experiencing a level of development issues. The problem was that the one-on-one swordplay mechanic was difficult to implement, and the team was spending 2 years on experimenting with various ideas that could be used in Skyward Sword, a process that was seemingly difficult, with Miyamoto admitting that Skyward Sword was experiencing a level of franchise fatigue. Miyamoto, if you don't know who that is, he's basically a very obscure and little known game developer who helped with the Zelda franchise. He basically said that Skyward Sword was not proceeding as planned, and there was some debate as to whether or not the team really wanted to create a Zelda title out of, wanting to make it, or was just making a Zelda game because they were being told to. Miyamoto's game design philosophy is to find a game concept that will be interesting and expand the game around the concept. But the selected concept for the game, one-on-one sword combat with motion controls, was proving to be super challenging and demoralizing. At one point, the Wii Motion Plus was introduced, and it seemed like this was going to be the thing that would save the project because the Wii Motion Plus would allow for more accurate Wii Motion sensing things. But this ultimately proved to just be more of a challenge to implement, and it was almost decided to just discard the whole thing and move on to something new. However, a ray of hope shined in the form of Wii Sports Resort's sword fighting minigame, which showcased a method of swordplay that they realized could be mirrored for this Zelda game, so it was decided to just borrow those same mechanics for the game. 2 years would go by, and aside from a 2008 public announcement by Miyamoto that a new Zelda game was in development, and a piece of concept art in 2009, practically no information was revealed about the game, with the official reasoning being that the game was in too rough of a state to be shown off. Which is fair, I suppose, as well as the beginning of a new trend of showing major Nintendo releases at the later stages of development, ignoring Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, since that's how Skyward Sword was first shown off. And that is exactly what we will look at, actually. E3 2010 was when we would get our first video look into the new Zelda game, showcasing a very fascinating gameplay trailer that also began with a nice tribute to the past Zelda games, since this was going to be a 25th anniversary release. After showcasing this render of Link, we are shown gameplay in various locations throughout the early parts of the game, including Faron Woods and the Earth Temple, and most of it seems pretty finalized, minus some possible object placement differences, such as this eye door that normally isn't seen outside of dungeons. However, in the footage, we can see that Link is using the Hylian Shield and Master Sword in these locations, even though you get those in later parts of the game, although this was likely just to avoid spoilers. You can also see that Link can do the Skyward Strike without pointing his sword skyward, which is interesting. And there's also no shield gauge, likely because they didn't want people dealing with broken shields. Maybe, I don't know. Moldarok, the boss of the Lanayru mining facility, could also be found in this unknown part of Faron Woods, which likely only existed so people could try to fight a boss without having to slog through complicated dungeons. Different icons existed for the items you had, and intriguingly, the whip had a skull design on it and was originally called the Skull Whip, although why this was changed is beyond me. However, unfortunately, beyond this stuff, there aren't many differences to talk about, since Skyward Sword was, as said, revealed at a pretty late stage in development when a lot of this stuff was pretty much finalized. But there are still some other things that we can talk about that are very interesting. Various character concept art shows some very interesting details, such as different designs for Groose, Zelda, Girahim, and the Loftwings, all of which are pretty neat, especially Girahim, although the final designs are still pretty cool. Most interesting of the bunch were these concept pics of Link, showcasing a more realistic and or adult look for Link reminiscent of Twilight Princess. I believe it was considered that Skyward Sword would have used a graphical style similar to Twilight Princess, but it was changed to the brightly colored Impressionist style for the sake of making it easier for players to determine enemy movements and behaviors, which makes sense. And there's also the artistic reason too. Aside from that, we also have these designs for Fi, or Fi, I think it's Fi, that look very snazzy, and some seem to match the various levels of the Goddess Sword, with a few looking like the Master Sword actually. This maybe suggest that it was planned for Fi to have an evolving look based on the level the Goddess Sword was on, which would have been nice if this was true, but again, I don't know if it is, so who knows. Aside from that, we have this piece of concept art showcasing Link using Fi as a parachute, likely intended to have been used before the sailcloth was created. Whatever the case, this looks really funny. Yeah. Aside from that, various pieces of concept art showcase that at one point in the game's development, it was intended for the surface world to have been interconnected in some fashion. An idea that, while it would have made the game more like the older 3D Zelda games, was tragically discarded, seemingly due to Skyward Sword already breaking the limits of the Wii's hardware capabilities and one disc limit. Which, I mean, you could just make it multiple discs, but whatever. Along with that are these pieces of Skyloft, showcasing a Skyloft that was not only bigger, but more complex, livelier, and multi-layered, which would have been more preferable over the medium-sized Skyloft in the final, though I still love the final Skyloft either way. As for any beta or unused items or things in this game, there isn't a whole lot to find because it seems like everything was used somehow. But I guess there is this unused animation of Karain being blown by the gust jar, this test map, which seems to be like any other test map you find in the game, and this early map of Lanayru Desert here. But that's about it. Oh yes, and I almost forgot, this unused ceiling spike. Which, that's cool, I guess. As for various other little fact thingies, it was originally planned to use realistic sword fighting moves, but considering that this impeded on Link's character portrayal, it was decided to add in unnatural movements to preserve Link's character and the atmosphere. I mean, okay, I guess. From this was also the inclusion of the Skyward Strike, born out of an idea to charge the sword beam attack by holding the sword upwards, which gave birth to the name of the game. Dowsing was also incorporated in the game early on, likely from those experiments mentioned earlier, as a new approach to exploration, though this had the effect of making landmarks useless in world design, which would result in the creation of beacons as a substitute. Dashing was included as the removal of a dedicated sword button allowed for additional actions to be implemented, and to make exploration a little more seamless. It was decided that players can run up walls when run into, rather than crash into them. Items were specially designed to be visible from any area in any environment, which explains the bright and bold colors and shapes of bombs, rupees, hearts, and so forth. The beetle was also originally a boomerang, but this was changed when the team wanted to have an item that could be controlled with the Wiimote. With the beetle being designed after ancient technology, this inspired the idea of the ancient tech theme of the Lanayru Desert area. It was also said by Aonuma that there were going to be more items present in the game, but due to difficulties with the mechanics, they had to be cut, although he did say that those items could appear in the next Zelda game. I don't really know what these items were because it was never really revealed, but there you have it, I guess. Considering the time the quote was said, that game could have been either Link Between Worlds, Triforce Heroes, or Breath of the Wild, but we do see some pretty unorthodox Zelda items in those games, so perhaps they were actually from Skyward Sword. Maybe. I'm not really sure because it was never really revealed what these items were. And maybe Tears of the Kingdom could give us more unused Skyward Sword items. Who's to say? And finally, it was said by Miyamoto that the game was originally supposed to be a more challenging game, but as we can see in the final game, this was considerably toned down. likely to appeal to casual gamers a little more. Which is fine, I guess, but I kinda wish Skyward Sword was more difficult, but whatever. And on a second final note, it turns out that there were actually plans to have a sort of second quest or something, where you played as Zelda during her adventures throughout the game, but this was seemingly cut. Darn. That would have been so excellent. But whatever. Frick. But that was the beta and development of Skyward Sword, and some other interesting things about the game too. While not the best Zelda game, it's still a very fascinating game with a very fascinating development period. And while the final game is very awesome, some of these early concepts seemed really interesting, and I kinda wish they were implemented in the final game. I mean, sure, it would have blown up the Wii, but come on, this could have been awesome, especially if this was new content for the HD remaster of Skyward Sword. But regardless, Skyward Sword is still awesome, and I still love it to death, despite its weird quirks. This has been K-Steel of Beta Quest signing out. I will see you all later. This was a Cobalt Steel video by MS Bernie. Like, comment, and subscribe if you liked what you saw. Until next time, see you all later.